Retro.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continuously unexpected. So uncivilized.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode is our discussion of the last three episodes from Tales of the Underworld, and they feature Cad Bane. So before we see what Bane's up to, Jay, I want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
You got it, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram, conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the disc aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So, once again, this is the discussion of the last three episodes of Tales of the Underworld featuring Cad Bane. They're called The Good Life, A Good Turn, and One Good Deed. A little bit of a motif there.
Yeah.
As we do with these things, Jay, let's get into our non-spoiler reactions. What did you think about these three episodes?
Well, I really, really treasured getting to know Cad Bane's backstory because he's definitely one of the most mysterious characters in all of Star Wars and one of the best and most, awesome bounty hunters that there is out there. And he had very humble beginnings. And I just appreciated knowing where those beginnings, brought him through and brought him to as far as what we know of him currently. And a lot of intrigue, a lot of espionage, if you will, of sorts, and just great episodes overall. But what did you think? I know Cad Bane's one of your favorite characters ever, so I was so excited for you that there was this focus in Tales of the Underworld.
Yeah, these were really good. They were quite fantastic. It's a fun story. I think I remarked when we were discussing the Asajj Ventress episodes that it's really impressive how much story they can get across in the confines of these 12 to 15-minute episodes. And these were no exception here.
Mm-hmm.
There is some thematic stuff that also ties to what happened in the Asajj Ventress episodes, and we'll get into that as we get a little bit farther, which I really appreciated. I liked the backstory, and it was like just enough here, I think, to kind of give you an idea where, like you were saying, where he came from and why he's the way he is. Although I'm not exactly sure that it explains all that, but we'll get into that as well. Very much a Western influence, like so much of Star Wars is, right down to showdowns in the street, shootouts, I should say.
Oh,
And what I found interesting is like the setting for this, like, feels like it was ripped right out of Chicago or New York with the elevated streets and things like that they did. It had a very real world feel that kind of made me think a bit about Skeleton Crew as well. We were talking about, the manicured lawns and Star Wars suburbia, and this was, Star Wars downtown New York. So to, by comparison there with that. So it was some interesting design choices with that. And I think I'm not certain these episodes necessarily make me see Bane a different way, but it does kind of confirm how to say this. It kind of confirms he is the way he is for a reason, I suppose.
Right.
And so that I liked. I don't know that it really changed anything. Unlike Asajj, where she's a different character, very different character in Tales of the Underworld than she was in the Clone Wars, and about the same character when we got to see her in the Bad Batch. But Cad is, at the end of the day, the same guy that we know, but maybe now we understand a little bit more about that. So
Right. Yeah, his whole backstory just really establishes his foundation. And, as you said at the very beginning, with the use of the word good in all three of these episodes, it does create this feeling that he was always searching for a better life
Hmm.
and it was always ending in some sort of loss or, tragedy, if you will, for him.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into some more details. So, if you've been sticking with us just long enough to get the non-spoiler reactions, we are now going to move into a more detailed discussion. So, we'll say goodbye to you for now if you want to go check out these episodes without being spoiled. But with that, okay, there is a lot of themes or several themes going on in these 3 episodes. And you got elements of nature versus nurture as we see what happens between Cad, who goes off with the gangsters, and his buddy that Nero that does not. How their lives turn out different. Themes of revenge, or maybe being willing to put those things revenge, things like revenge aside, and then even love loss here
Mhm.
going on. Did any one of those particular themes stick out to you?
Well, with the whole love loss thing, I was actually a little bit confused at first
Hmm.
until I rewatched it a second time because I was trying to figure out at first who Aaron really was because it
Hmm.
almost felt like Lazlo, and I kept calling him Dad Bane because he was just, you know,
Hmm.
kind of that father figure that Cad Bane, aka Colby, took after. And it seemed like he took her in as well. Is that what I'm understanding? Because at first I thought she was more of a sister figure for
Hmm.
him because there was almost like this tease of, oh yeah, I'll take care of him and kind of, hit him on the shoulder sort of thing, to take care of him. But yeah, that was a big one for me that I had to really wrap my head around a little bit more. And then his friendship, just from the very beginning and just starting out as two street rats together and then trying to make a way for themselves. And then they were, ripped in two different directions. That was a big thing for me as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like the different environment, the nature versus nurture thing I was alluding to there.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as far as Erin goes, we meet her in episode 2, and there's some ambiguity about their relationship there.
Yes.
They're not really displaying a whole lot of romantic feelings towards each other. It's not until we get to the end of that episode and discussions in episode 3 where it becomes clear what their relationship actually was, which was that there was a romantic element to it. So yeah, so there's that. I want to put one of the things I had next on the list was to kind of talk about how these episodes compared to the Asajj Ventress episodes, but I think maybe that discussion is best to do after we've talked about each of these episodes first. So you kind of alluded to it. We get to meet Cad Bane, and he is a child by the name of Colby. And we talked about this off air before we started recording, but when I heard his name was Colby, I sat up straight because I was like, wait a minute. Colby Krebs?
Yeah, exactly. I know, and I was telling you we had to look at the credits to see if it was spelled with a C or a K.
Yeah. It's not, but still, every time, it took me hearing that name a few times before I could just stop chuckling that it was, in
Right.
fact. But someone, name I know. But anyway,
Exactly.
and they are street rats. So they've been essentially living on the street. We come to find out that Cad and Nero's his best friend. He's a green skin Duro compared to Colby slash Cad's blue skin. They don't really know their parents. They've been without their parents for a long time. They're busy trying to find food wherever they can, which is out of trash cans frequently. Doesn't
Mhm.
really discuss them. They just fish around for it. And then they kind of get chased out of anywhere that they are. There's a particular store that they're interested in. It's got the goodies. And then Daddy Bane, as you were pointing out, who will come to find out his name is Lazlo, happens to watch them and basically sets them up on a job to provide a distraction while he and his crew infiltrate a store, then go to the back and and rob the illegal casino. I mean, it's not explicitly said that that's what it is, but when one of the patrons gets greeted by, "Hey, hope your luck is better this time," and it's a secret entrance to this establishment in the back, that's clear what it is. So
Oh, yeah.
anyway, so you touched on it a little bit, but what do you think about these humble beginnings and life on the street for these two?
Oh, yeah, they're very humble beginnings, and the second time I watched it through, I focused more on their environment as a whole, and
Hmm.
I didn't realize it the first time, but, I mean, these streets were seriously just littered throughout
Hmm.
wherever they were, and so you know that they were in a part of town that was definitely not conducive to growing up having any kind of wealth whatsoever. And, so when they get this little bit of coin from Lazlo, they do what any kid would do, which is go buy candy, because they
Mm-hmm.
want their crunchies sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, and they just seemed so innocent, even though they were messing with that one droid and trying to get the fresh fruit from him in exchange for the rotten fruit. But I mean, they were doing whatever they needed to survive, but they had each other. And that to me, it was very endearing in that way, which eventually makes what happens later even harder to watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And jumping ahead to the second episode real quick, it's when you're talking about the relationship of these two, when Cad finally gets back to this planet, which they don't explicitly name, I'm assuming it's Duros, but it could be something else.
Mhm.
He runs into Nero as an adult and gives him this big hug. And that was like the most shocking thing that I saw out of these three
Yeah.
episodes, is that Cad Bane has no affection for anybody, anywhere else we see him, whether it's the Clone Wars or the Book of Boba Fett or the Bad Batch. He is all business and ruthless. And to
Yes.
hear him display affection for someone and to say he was my oldest friend, and there was genuine warmth in his voice when he
Exactly.
said that. Yeah, so they did a good job explaining the relationship between these two at that time. But even as kids, you could kind of see the difference between them, as like Nero was more cautious. He was not going to be the big risk. I say he's not going to be the big risk taker, but their life was full of risk already. They were going
Mhm.
places that they fishing food out of trash cans, manipulating the droid to get the food that you were just talking about. And those type of actions have consequences. And so when they're offered 5 coins, which is 5 times as much as that they were just given as an investment, Nero says it's not worth it. And so that's clearly, let's walk away. But Cad turns it into, you're right, it's not worth it for 5. We want 10
Yeah.
there. Big difference in their personalities that we get to see early
Mhm.
on.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of that too comes from we don't really know what happened with Nero so much as we do. I mean, Cad Bane or Colby says, I never knew my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know exactly what happened to Nero to bring him to that point as well. But, I think for Colby slash Cad Bane, it was always just kind of dog eat dog world, kill or be killed, which he wasn't to that point yet in his life, but just get every little bit that you can.
You're exactly right, because as we'll see over these 3 episodes, they came from the same place. And this was the nature versus nurture, which is not even the best description of it. But Nero was, this is not worth it. And then from what happens here, he's looking at maybe improving the situation
Right.
from the beginning. But for Cad is like, these are the cards we're dealt. Let's make the best of it, and we'll take advantage of whatever we can get on this. And it's much more inward looking than what Nero had going on there.
Mhm.
And I'm not entirely certain that when this job happens at the end of the episode and Nero gets caught by the police while Colby gets off with Lazlo and the others, if that had been swapped, if I don't think that Colby would have grown up to be a lawman, and I'm not certain that Nero would have stuck with Lazlo for the long term.
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
if anything, Cad probably would have gone back to living on the street doing the same type of stuff. And while he may not have ended up in a professional game like a gang like Lazlo's, he would have been pulling like confidence games or the like there on his home planet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how, those little bits of circumstance and fate really do make that road diverge for each one of
Hmm.
them.
Hmm. So let's get into the next episode, which is called A Good Turn. And this all starts off with they're on a different planet, some sort of industrial world. It could have been one of a dozen other places that we've seen, or brand new for all we know. And Lazlo and his crew are preparing to go on some sort of a job. And we see them kind of loading up their ship with weapons. And Cad wants to go, and you talked about this a little bit earlier in the episode, but Lazlo's leaving him behind. Cad says, that's my old neighborhood, I should go. And Lazlo says, don't be sentimental, and then tells Aaron to keep an eye on him. And they leave. They're not gone very long. Cad and Aaron are playing cards, and then all of a sudden Lazlo's ship comes back. We find out that Lazlo was killed on this mission by a lawman. And Cad only has ideas of revenge in mind after this, despite what Aaron says. And when they get back to the neighborhood, they run right away into Nero, who is now a deputy with the marshal. And he's trying to warn Cad off that, here's the thing, it can't get messy because it'll be bad for you as well. Why do you think Cad Bane was so bent on revenge in this? Because he doesn't say anything like, that man lifted me up out of poverty, or he did so much to me. It's just that he's like, the lawman killed Lazlo, I'm gonna go kill him. There's no big discussion about why Cad is so driven to get revenge.
Well, I think for, Cad Bane, it was Lazlo was his one and only father figure.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though he was close to Nero when they were kids, Nero made his choice to go his own way. And I think maybe in some way too, Cad Bane was maybe just a little bit, I don't want to say jealous, but maybe envious of the fact that Nero, and Nero represented the law. And so the law is something for Cad Bane that he equivalates with the opposite of what he wanted to embody. You know what I mean? I'm putting this in a very messy way, but
Sure.
I think some of it has to do with that comparison between, oh, you were able to go do this, and even though being lawful is the quote unquote right thing to do, Lazlo was the only father I ever had. So because he was lawless, I'm going to uphold that to, the extreme. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
any sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I think there's something. I think there's
Make it
something
very
to that.
clumsy.
Yes, Lazlo was, to the extent there was any type of a father figure, Lazlo took him in.
Uh-huh.
When the job was over and they were being chased down, chased away. Lazlo said, it's like, he told the, come on kids, come on boys, keep coming. He could have easily left them behind and let them take the fall for all this, and there wouldn't have been any consequences for Lazlo. But he encouraged them to come, so he was interested in taking them in. And he did set that example. Once they were in Lazlo's speeder, he says to Cad, I've got good news and I got bad news. The bad news is that, your friend got captured or left behind or whatever the situation is. The good news is your take just doubled on that. And so there is kind of this, Lazlo's teaching him there, you got to look out for yourself, whatever. I also think part of this is that, yeah, Lazlo may have been a father figure, but this was as much about Cad getting like revenge on the environment as anything, which is, it was almost an excuse. Lazlo got killed running this mission, and yeah, it was someone that was important to Cad Bane, but the other thing was like, that's the last place where Cad was like treated really, really badly. He was trying to make a way, life for himself on the streets. He had people chasing him out of the stores. When they go to shop in the candy shop there, the shopkeeper is like, he doesn't outright accuse them of stealing, but it's like, where'd you all get this?
Right.
And then, I can't remember which one of them says like, we earned it. They had to stand up for themselves, but everyone looked at them as this nuisance, as this not our problem. There was no one to take them in on this. And now the environment has taken something from Cad. And if he hadn't been explicitly told who it was that killed Lazlo, I could see him going back and just shooting up the town
Oh, yeah,
just to
for
kind of get
sure.
that revenge
Yeah,
in
and
that
like you
regard.
said, it was more of a symbolic thing than anything
Mm-hmm.
else because, Cad Bane, even when he sees Nero, he says to him, well, ain't you fancy now? Or something
That
like
made
that. It's
me
like he was,
laugh.
oh, I know. But, then it was a dig, but it was almost like he was sort of envious in a way too, like, oh, look at you. You're on this
Yeah,
side of things
I didn't
now.
see envy so much as just kind of a, it was a realization, and that was just kind of like the words that came out of his mouth. But
It's
it,
such a great line.
yeah, and especially coming from Cad, that's like one of the last things I would have expected to hear Cad say. I mean,
So
well,
it's so cowboy though,
yeah,
you
ain't
know?
too fancy now. And so yeah, yeah, and that's part of the thing. So we have the early, you bring up the cowboy thing. This is where in the Western movie, the idea of a showdown at noon originates, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, and then we're headed right towards that. You've got the deputies and the lawmen kind of trying to discourage it, but they're good lawmen, so they can't do anything until the bad guy's actually done something here. And
Right.
I mean, I got Tombstone vibes. That was one of my favorite movies
Oh,
back
for
in the
sure.
90s.
I
Yeah,
love
and
Tombstone.
yeah, and I kept getting those vibes from this episode. And Aaron is trying to talk Cad Bane out of doing anything here as well. And,
Mhm.
we get the reason for that in the third episode. So we'll get to that in a bit. But, she keeps telling us like there's more at stake than you realize. She's clearly trying to convey that this is not worth it here.
Yes.
Yeah, they got him, but we got to move on this. But he's so single-minded about this, is that it is revenge and there's nothing else to be done until he gets it on here.
Mhm. Yep.
And then he finally gets his opportunity. After Nero goes back and talks to the marshal is saying, hey, be careful, things could escalate. And Cad springs his trap. He bombs that old abandoned store and he waits for the marshal to show up. And when the marshal gets there, Cad's already shot some of the police droids.
Yeah.
And he's like, are you the lawman? That's what he says.
So
He doesn't
good.
even care. And then they have their standoff. And, Nero comes charging down the street. And when unbeknownst to us, Aaron is behind Cad. Now, we've seen her earlier. She saw the smoke from the explosion and decided to leave the ship. And Cad has the shootout with the marshal and wins, shoots the marshal right in the gut. And the marshal's dying. And then Nero and the other droid show up, and she's taken a shot from the marshal. His shot missed Cad, it hit her in the shoulder, and she can't escape. And she keeps saying, she says, we have a future. And his response is, we will. I'm going to make sure of it. But before Cad can face off with Nero, she's taken his gun and thrown it over to Nero, saying it's like, I can't lose you. And Cad's response is that she's a traitor. And her response is
Yeah.
that she didn't have any choice in all of this. Okay. We think a bit ahead to episode 3. Was he really angry with her and really think she was a traitor? Because he does specifically come back to this world for her. That's his reason for coming back.
I don't think he honestly thought she was a traitor. I think that the thing that stood out is the fact that she was trying to save him from himself,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, and I think that the word traitor was more of a personal, um, you know, kind of against him, but not. Again, I'm falling over my words, but she did it with the best of intentions, but he didn't see it that way. He saw it as being against him. But I don't know if traitor is necessarily, it's almost like Anakin calling Padme traitor, it's
Mm-hmm.
the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. That's a good way of thinking about it.
Mhm.
But I think the other thing that's telling is that, as Cad's been like cuffed and being led away by the police droids, Nero says to him, you got your revenge. I hope it was worth it. And his response is, it will be.
Mhm.
So what do you make of that line there in the context of these 3 episodes?
Well, I think he's got a bigger vendetta against just the law in general, and that
Mm-hmm.
this was just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I kind of think so. I think that gets back to what I was saying about the revenge against the environment here,
Right.
which is
Mhm.
that he got revenge against the environment, that was by killing the marshal, but now he's arrested and the person he's interested in has been shot in the shoulder. And so it's like, when he's talking about, you got your revenge, I hope it was worth it. And he's talking about a future tense, it will be.
Mhm.
He's like, I'm going to come back and do this again, because that's like the only thing that's filling some hole in his soul when
Yeah,
it comes
exactly.
down to it, is this notion of revenge. And let's get into that third episode, which is One Good Deed. The city is prospering. It went from being this filthy, dirty place, and they
Mhm.
managed to turn around, just like Nero was talking about in the last episode. And we see a Trandoshan on a speeder bike just tearing through the city, and the speeder bike is not even like in the best shape. But to the chagrin of all the people in the city, they're like, he's cutting them off. He's almost running into people and causing other speeders to like run off the road and stuff like that. It's very striking, the difference. And then he gets to the spaceport and he runs, and that Transocean's name is Vac Laco, by the way. And he meets up with another member of Lazlo's gang by the name of Tay Gruddy. And an informant calls it in, and everyone puts two and two together. They're waiting on Cad Bane to come back because there was some sort of a technicality, and Cad's been released, and there's a shuttle coming from that planet, Toronto, that day. It'll be there at noon. The perfect time, of course, for a Western shootout.
Oh yeah, high noon.
So and can we talk about just for a second the Indiana Jones homage in all of this, where we keep getting that angle, like he puts on the hat where you can't see his face, and then he looks up.
Yes, so
I love
good.
that. And it's the same thing as the beginning of The Last Crusade, where we see Indiana as a teenager, stealing the Cross of Coronado
Oh yeah.
from these guys. And then at the end, he's given the hat, and he goes, and then when he looks down, then when he looks up again, he's adopted the look of this guy, which is exactly what Cad's done. He's
Mm-hmm.
adopted the look of Lazlo with this. So, the toothpick, the hat, everything.
Yep, right down to it.
Yeah.
And, and again, I think that he was embodying that because that's the person that pulled him from being a street rat,
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to know what that technicality was that, Bane was able to get out of prison on. They never really said. I mean, they just said it was a technicality, but I'm wondering what it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, and I could imagine 100 different things that it could be. There was some improper procedure at his trial, some sort of, not giving him some measure of due process, whatever it is. I mean, the type of things that come up in our legal system all the way, where someone has committed a crime, but they're forced to let go because we have a legal procedure. If it's not followed, then we can't convict them, we can't incarcerate, type of a thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
could have been any of a dozen things there.
Do you think that Nero had anything to do with the quote unquote technicality?
No, because he seemed invested in, because he was so calm
Keeping
about
him
it.
there?
About Cad,
Yeah.
he's going to be gone for another 5 years, and clearly his deputy was like, I'm going to check into that because I don't want to be around if Cad
Yeah,
Bane shows up.
right.
And not only that, it's like, Nero is very much, more than anybody in this town, he is into the law and order of all this. I could just see him in Old Westerns, like, we got to have some laws, speaking of Tombstone,
There you
and
go.
because he gets summoned by the mayor and the city council, and the one councilman's like, hey, no one would blame you if you just sent your droids after him and took him out.
Mhm.
And Nero's like, I don't understand your meaning. What are you
Right.
talking about here?
Yeah.
It's I can't do anything until he does something, and we don't even know that he's coming here yet.
Mhm.
And so you got to have your respect for Nero and all of that. And I know, was Nero being naive? I mean, was he that that possibly Cad Bane was not going to show up, and even if he did, he wouldn't be going through with some sort of revenge plot?
I think he was more hopeful than anything, that he
Mm-hmm.
was trying to, see the good in him that was maybe still there after all those years.
Yeah, I don't know. Yes, he was being hopeful, but naively so, I think, is the
Right.
way I'm
Oh,
thinking
yeah,
about it. Is that,
definitely.
that this was even a possibility for this guy. Like, Cad was going to go away for all these years after a revenge plot, and then not look for another one when he got back
Mhm.
on all that. But that's the thing. What was the primary purpose of coming back? Was it to get Aaron and pick up the things with her, get revenge on Aaron, or get revenge on Nero?
Yeah, maybe all of the above.
Yeah. I'm thinking about a lot about this, and I'm wondering, I think it may be all of, well, at least two of the three, which was to find Aaron and get revenge on Nero, because he does go to the police headquarters. And that's what, in fact, what it says on Orabesh about the door is police.
Alright.
And he has that shootout there before he even knows where Aaron is. He's got Vac and Tay in sniper positions overlooking the entrance to the police headquarters there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when Nero finally tells him that Aaron passed away a few years ago, Cad's response to that is like, that's the one thing you didn't really want to say today. Or I can't remember exactly how he says it, but it's the, oh, you are saying the one thing you shouldn't be saying today. And so it's kind of like, now he's got another reason to get revenge. He came back for Aaron and to get revenge, and now Aaron's gone, so he's going to get more revenge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like adding insult to injury almost, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
in for a penny and for a pound at this point.
Mm-hmm. And of course, during all of this, we find out that Nero had married Aaron, and Aaron had a son named Isaac.
Yeah.
And then during the duel, which of course Cad Bane wins against Nero, we finally get the confirmation. It's not explicitly said, but there's no other way to interpret, as far as I'm concerned, that Isaac is actually Cad Bane's son.
Yes.
At what
Yes.
point did that occur to you?
It took me a hot minute, I'm not gonna lie, because,
Mhm.
I was thinking to myself, okay, time-wise, like, how does this play out? And
Mhm.
but I mean, it's after you think about it, I mean, it's pretty obvious. But I mean, and then Cad Bane just like walks away.
Mhm.
Just walk.
Did you see his reaction? Because he shot, the duel happens, and Cad shoots Nero with both blasters, and Nero misses. And then Isaac runs up and, is talking about Papa, and he's crying. And I think it's, but, Nero had said earlier, there's something Adam wanted Bane to know, but couldn't tell him. And then Cad says, you took everything from me. And then Nero's response is, not everything. And then there's just a slightest twitch. But we get these look at both Cad's and Isaac's eyes. And then as Isaac is leaning over Nero, Cad kind of reaches for him just a bit. And then the mayor shows up and says, like, get away from him, you monster. And
Mhm.
that's when he turns around and leaves. So, I was wondering, because when Isaac shows up at the police station after he'd already been sent home by Nero, Cad is almost like taunting Nero with this. It's like, oh, who do we have here? Don't worry, I'll take care of him the way you took care of Aaron
Yeah, that was a
on
dig.
this.
Oof.
But I'm kind of wondering if that was almost Cad looking at like this is like, I have an opportunity to get my revenge on Nero and then get further revenge by taking this kid and raising him in my own image.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes you wonder what did actually happen to Isaac after all of this.
Mm-hmm. We'll
Because it's
have,
definitely not a Django Boba Fett kind of relationship, that's for sure.
yeah. Here's the thing. I would have joked and said like he'd be the subject of some sort of like Tales of the New Republic, 20 years later or whatever, and we get to see him. But it occurs to me what all these different Tale series is that they're filling in holes of the story of characters we already know. We had Ahsoka and Dooku, and then we had Elsbeth and Barasafi, and the fourth sister.
Thank
Gotta let
you.
that hurt. Yeah, I know. Just for you, Jay. And then we have Asajj and Cad Bane here. But then they add thematic elements to go ahead and tell these stories. There's something about the characters that they feature in each one of these that there's enough of a mirror that you can look at a theme from two different sides and all this. So I don't see Isaac coming up in it. That's a long way of saying I don't see Isaac coming up in another Tales series, but I would not, because he's not had a story from Clone Wars, Rebels, one of the movies or something like that. He is a side character here. That's not to say
Mhm.
his story won't be told someplace else. I just don't expect it to be in Tales. Anyway,
Yeah, that's
um,
fair. I think
yeah.
maybe he represents more. I mean, there's so much of symbolism of death and rebirth in all of
Mhm.
these episodes. I mean, if you think about it, in all of the tales of series, and maybe that's just what Isaac's supposed to just represent is the rebirth, death and rebirth kind of thing. I don't know.
Well, and I suppose it adds another wrinkle also to the environmental question. Is Cad a product of his environment or the people he surrounded himself with?
Mhm.
And we got to see him as a kid. He was the big risk taker. And when no one was looking out for him, he was looking out for number one. And then that morphed into he's now a monster seeking revenge. Meanwhile, Nero was the more cautious of the two. And as he grew up, he went to the law and his focus became rebuilding the city. Isaac is not crying about revenge. He's crying for loss. And he's crying, over Nero being a person he considers his father, Papa being gone. So that's not to say that he couldn't be looking for revenge later, but he appears to be being taken in by the mayor here.
Mhm.
The mayor shows up and is protecting him, and the one city councilwoman is like, she's the one that puts two and two together. It's like Cad's coming back for Aaron, and wait till he finds out about her, and then but then there's also Isaac, and so there's multiple people there that have Isaac's best interest at heart in that
Yeah.
city.
Yeah.
So,
Which is good for Isaac,
mhm,
for
mhm.
sure.
Yeah. And then, Cad wanders off. And then the next time we see him is, chronologically, is in the Clone Wars as the baddest bounty hunter in the galaxy.
Yeah.
So, and he never has another affectionate moment that I can think of. I mean, it's all manipulation. It's what he can get out of people. He uses them for jobs. He blows up his own droid to complete a mission
Yeah, for
and the
sure.
like.
He's
Yeah.
ruthless.
hmm And so these were really three really, really good episodes. The last question I have is, if you take these three episodes and you put them up against the Asajj Ventress episodes, what's our takeaway supposed to be from this season of Tales of the Underworld? What do you think?
Well, like I said, I think a lot of it has to do with death and rebirth and then loss and, definitely I mean, as far as Cad Bane goes, he started off life much more innocently. Although I
hmm
can't really say that because Asajj had I wouldn't say an innocent beginning, but she started off as a Jedi and then went down a dark path and then was redeemed. Whereas with Cad Bane being Colby so young, he had a rough life, but it wasn't an evil life. You know what I mean?
hmm
So there's that, but they both I think are dealing with a brutal past and using that to escape their future in some ways, and rebuilding a new future, but they definitely take two different divergent paths for sure. So,
Yeah, I think for me, it's a difference of redemption versus revenge in all this, because
mm,
the death and rebirth thing is there to, at least to a degree. Assange comes back because, as Mother Talzin says, he's giving you a gift.
mhm,
And, what's it going to cost? Your heart's desire. So she comes back, and instead of seeking revenge for this, because she's lost her love, Quinlan Voss, she starts off kind of being, again, insular, that she's just making a living. She's being, trying to keep her nose out of what's going on in the Empire. But then she actively says, I don't want to be that person anymore, who
mhm,
she was as Asajj Ventress, the assassin for Count Dooku. And she goes so far to help a Jedi that needs that help, and recognizes, at the end of that trilogy episodes, you are a good Jedi. You deserve all this. And she sees something that she doesn't deserve, or at least, in her mind. And despite all that, I can't think of the kid's name, but you know who I'm talking about, the Jedi kid, he chooses to go with her. The
mhm,
flip side of that is Cad Bane. He experiences a love loss as well when he finds out Aaron's died. And so all that does for him is propel him deeper into the revenge motive, and he doesn't seek any redemption. Or the extent there's redemption for him, it is revenge. It is
right,
just continue to take this out on the galaxy.
right,
It's
it's
kind of like
true.
Darth Vader in that way when it comes down to it.
Yeah, 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 and Asajj does find that glimpse of redemption, but Bane never does.
hmm And she
It's
doesn't see herself as being worthy of it. Meanwhile,
right.
Cad Bane comes from a position of entitlement,
Mhm,
which is, it's like, how dare you take this person from me? How dare, in Lazlo, how dare you take Aaron for me? And then, how dare she betray me and all this? And it's he's much more selfish than that. And, they completely diverged on their path. They come from those humble beginnings, did some terrible things, and then one chose the path of redemption, the other one chose the path of revenge. So,
right, yeah,
yeah.
Cad Bane always stayed very emotionally detached and
hmm
calculating, whereas Asajj eventually developed empathy.
Yeah. One of the things I did kind of like about this is that I don't know that I can look at these episodes and say Cad Bane's a tragic figure. because I get the impression that this was always his personality, and that
hmm
he was going to be a cold, calculating, potentially murderous type of a person, regardless of all this type of a thing. And you might argue that someone who does not change is not an interesting character, and then why are we telling? Is that a story that really needs to be told? But not every story that he's in is his story. So it's just
Right.
he doesn't have to be the interesting character when it comes down to
Mhm.
it. And so just him being this constant there up until his end, what we believe to be his end, the Book of Boba Fett, is comforting is not the right word, but
It's
uh
constant.
yeah. So anyway, I think you know what I'm saying there.
Yes. Yes, I do.
Okay. You have any other thoughts on these episodes before we wrap up?
I just think they're so well crafted, and I
Mm,
just appreciate the storytelling and the character building. And like you said, it's not necessarily that Cad Bane had to be this, central character in all of these different things. But I mean, he's been such a presence and such a mysterious one that it was just really nice to get to see those origin stories. And,
mhm.
as you said, he's not necessarily a tragic figure, but it does give you some more understanding, which I always appreciate.
Which story did you like better, Asajj or Cad?
Oh gosh, that's such a tough one. I mean, I love Asajj Ventress, and she's always had such a really special place for me.
Mhm.
But this was such a new story with Cad Bane and so fresh that we've not seen anything like it before, that I think it captivated my attention. I wouldn't say more, just in a
Mhm.
different way.
Mhm.
So I know that's kind of a cop out answer, but
No, it's
I
your answer. It's
almost,
fine. It's
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I enjoyed all of it, but I appreciated the freshness of the Cad Bane arc.
Yeah. I think I liked Assange's story a little bit better. And part of it is just because I liked her banter with
Oh, yeah, she's so
uh
great.
what is it? Largo? I can't remember. I'm going to, as soon as we finish recording this episode, I'm going to remember this kid's name. But the banter was there. There was the action scenes were better. There was there was character growth for Assange that Cad did not experience in his arc. And so I
Mhm.
think for me, that's why that was the better 3 episodes. But it's almost, having now asked you that question and answered it myself, it's almost not a fair question, because I think one of the things that makes these different Tales seasons so good is that they give you these two characters that make different decisions that are on a parallel track, and we get to see what the final results are, and it gives us an opportunity to have these conversations. So it's almost kind
Right.
of hard to divorce the two from each other.
Mhm.
So
No, I think that's totally fair, and a very good description as well. And his name was Lyco,
Lyco, I was close.
Lyco
Not Larko,
Strada.
Lyco. Yeah. Okay.
So
Thank you.
close.
All right.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, then we'll go ahead and wrap things up there. Thank you all for tuning in for this episode of Podcast Stardust and downloading the show. And we'll hope you consider downloading more episodes. We don't have any more tales coming up imminently, but I would not be surprised if we got some more next year. That does seem to be the pattern.
Mhm.
And if you want to get our ongoing discussions of Star Wars news, even to the Sith, we'll be getting back into the Clone Wars here in a few weeks, picking up with our review, which we left off in season 2. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and you'll get all that stuff downloaded automatically for you. And if you want more episodes than what our feed is providing, then head over to retrozap.com, and you can find the entire catalog of shows, as well as some other great shows on the network covering everything from superheroes to animation and Star Trek and a whole lot more. Jay, you gave everyone our social media contacts off the top of the episode. You want to do that one more time and let them know where else we can be found around the internet?
Absolutely. So it's really easy to find us. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we also have a bunch of great Pinterest boards to choose from. And so if you're in need of ideas for anything Star Wars, you can head over there. And we do have our 2 YouTube outlets. So you can head over to the YouTube traditional as well as YouTube music. We'd love it if you would subscribe to both of those, share those out with your friends, and also interact with us as well and let us know what you thought of these episodes of Tales of the Underworld or anything else that we do. And we also have a TeePublic store. So if you'd like to support the show, you can pick up one of 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of things from home goods to apparel and pretty much everything in between. So once again, head up that link in our show notes. And if you do happen to get anything, make sure you snap a picture and tag us so we can see where it ends up out in the wild.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and fill everybody in on what you got going on in cosplay?
All right. Well, as always, you can catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And so kind of quiet right now, just came off of an appearance a couple weeks ago and planning for some things for the summer. But you can see me as Ahsoka, the fourth sister. We were just talking about her. 2 different versions of Hera, as well as my Mandalorian, sometimes Princess Leia, and also some non-Star Wars things as well. So once again, that's at j.snipscosplay.
All right, upcoming on the show on Wednesday, it is part 5 of our Revenge of the Sith series. You do not want to miss that, so make sure you come back and hang out with us for that. And then on Friday, the current plan is to cover the week's Star Wars news, but that may change depending on what, if any, news we actually get this week. We'll see. So with that having been said, thanks for listening to episode 891 of Podcast Stardust. Have a great week, and until next time, may the Force be